Right, part two of the lover archetype. Let's get started. In part one, I spoke about the concept of having a dominant archetype and how that affects your personality and also how these archetypes work together. Now, to start this video off, I want to go back to that and I'm going to use different examples to help you to understand it a bit better. Now, remember, I've said this in the other episodes as well. This series is just an overview. I'm generalizing, I'm simplifying it. It goes way deeper than what I'm covering in these videos. But if you want to learn more about it, check out my social media accounts and keep an eye out for when I'm doing seminars, because there I go into way more depth than what I am in these videos. Okay, so what I want to do to start off is we're going to go back to the pie chart and we're going to use a different example. Now, if you look at this person, you'll see that they have a strong magician side, but a weak warrior side. Now, to simplify it, think of it like this. The magician is the mind and the warrior is the body. So it's non-physical and the physical. Now, remember, the warrior is the part of ourselves that wants to draw our sword and conquer the obstacle in front of us. That part of us with the fiery attitude saying, I will not go out like this. I will not be beaten. I will conquer the obstacle. That's that part of ourselves. So this person has got a weak warrior, which means that part of themselves is very weak. Now, see each archetype in a metaphorical sense that they have a voice. Okay, so see them as different parts of you that's having a discussion. So the warrior would say, hey, let's do this. Let's beat this thing. You see? So that voice within this person is very weak. The magician is a much louder voice within them. So what they'll probably do when they face a threatening situation, like losing their job, for example, they would default, because the magician's going to win this battle because it's excessive. That voice is loud. And they will pull their attention and focus and energy into the magician within, which means thinking. And that means overthinking, overanalyzing, probably thinking yourself into a panic attack and making the problem 100 times worse than what it actually is in reality. But if the same person had a stronger warrior, so they're a bit more balanced, this is what would happen. The warrior would bring the magician down to earth. So for example, the magician would say, you don't understand. It's going to be bad. I know what the statistics are. We've got a problem. People don't get jobs now. We're not going to get a job. It's going to be an issue. I can already see it play out in my head. The warrior would tell the magician, hey, listen, magician self, just come back down to earth for a second. Calm down. Let's get practical. What are we going to do to get out of this pickle? Let's stop thinking for a second and let's take action. So these archetypes are balancing each other out. But with the previous example, that warrior voice is almost non-existent. So they don't have that. And that's why they will crumble under pressure. Now we can use another example. Let's say someone's got a strong ruler, but a weak lover. So the ruler part of you, that voice, would tell you, this is the right decision. This is what you want. Make the decision, make it happen. The lover is the voice within saying, hold up. How will this affect the other person? Have you thought about them? Have you thought about their reality? Will it hurt them? Will they be happy with it? Right? So that's the lover voice. Now this person doesn't have a strong lover voice. That voice is very weak. So they would not take you in consideration because the lover's voice isn't loud enough to be heard. So they make a decision and they don't really care how it affects you. Now I want to take a look at one more example. Let's take a look at the opposite. Strong lover, weak ruler. Now remember, amongst many other things, your ruler is the part of you that's responsible. And the lover is the part of you that desires things, right? So let's say this person is in a situation where they desire something or someone. The lover voice within would tell them, hey, you really desire that. Go for it. Chase it. Where the ruler is supposed to kick in and say, hold up. Is this responsible? Is this the right thing to do? Now you can see in this person, that part of themselves is pretty weak, so that voice will almost not be heard. So what this person would probably do is chase their desires in a whim, and their desires will run away with them. And they will have to suffer the consequences for doing that, for irresponsibly chasing their desires. You see how this plays out? I hope it makes sense. So these archetypes balance each other out. One way to think of it is the excessive archetype is a compensating strategy for a deficiency somewhere else. Very interesting to think about it like that. Now, what's also interesting is each dominant archetype has got a preference on how to deal with certain situations. So let's say, for example, someone is threatening you. Maybe they're taking you on or whatever. If you're warrior dominant, that warrior voice will tell you, hey, don't let someone speak to you like that. Show them who's boss. And you'll get in their face and you will show them the fire that you have inside, right? So you will fight the threat head on. A ruler dominant will be like, okay, let's negotiate. Let's see what's best for both of us and we settle there. How can I help you and how can you help me? They're a bit more diplomatical, where the warrior is just like, no ways. See the warrior as a bit of an ego-driven archetype. So when it comes to the nurturer, they're all about helping and caring about other people. So they don't like seeing people upset. So they see, okay, clearly this is a big problem for you. How can I help you to resolve this problem? How can I nurture you in that way? That would be their primary response. If you look at the magician would outsmart the person who's trying to harm them or do whatever. So they will do the following. They will use the abilities of the magician, which is to see things from your perspective, gain insight, and then use that information to be 10 steps ahead. So everything you do, the magician already knows what you're going to do. And they're just either going to do the opposite or do what you don't expect, or just, use the situation and bend it to their advantage with this information. You see, so that's the magician. Now, lastly, let's take a look at someone who's dominant in the lover, how they would handle it. Think of a guy who's in a relationship and his partner is really angry at him. So what he would do is he would sweet talk her and say nice things with the hopes that the situation might resolve that way. Remember, why I put this in here is to show you that each archetype would approach life in a different way. They would approach situations in a different way. And that makes it really interesting. Now keep in mind, if you're balanced, you've got access to all the abilities of all the archetypes. And that's the goal. So whichever side of you have to call upon, you can do that in a balanced and healthy way. But what's also interesting is if you can't tap into your dominant choice of doing things, you will default to your secondary in most cases. So this is, in general, this happens. So for example, I am a ruler, dominant, and warrior secondary, second strongest in my development, okay? So what I would do is I would try and negotiate with you and say, okay, we don't have to go about this. How can we help each other? Let's take a look at it. If that doesn't work, I'll default to my secondary, which is warrior. So then I'll just take the opportunity to take the thread head on and sort it out with conflict. Fight fire with fire, you see? So it's quite interesting how this plays out in people. And like I said, it goes deep, but it's just interesting to take note of that. Now let's get into the deficient lover archetype, which means this part of yourself is not properly developed. Now this happens for many reasons, and I get into them in my deeper teachings and also my seminars, but I'm going to give you 2 examples in this video. Number 1, maybe you grew up in a household that didn't have a lot of lover qualities. So maybe your parents weren't really touchy-feely. You didn't talk about how you feel and your emotions and stuff. In fact, it was frowned upon. And you weren't allowed to talk about how you feel. Just get it done. I don't care how you feel. Maybe that was a situation. So pretty much what happened is you got conditioned to have a deficient lover side. Situation number 2 can be that you're a single mother and you're raising your child alone. So you have to bring out that warrior side of you to be able to provide for them, go out there, work and get money to support them, create the safety, and be strong and face the adversity that you're going through, the tough times that you're facing as a single parent. Maybe what you did is you pulled that from the lover, like I said in the previous episode, because perhaps your partner, the father of your child, left. They just left you with nothing. And that pain made you pull that out of the lover and pushed it into the warrior. So you became hard and that made you deficient. So these are 2 possible scenarios why you might be deficient. There's a lot more. Okay, these are just 2 examples. Now let's get into the 2 dark sides. Underdeveloped, we have what I call the reluctant lover, and I'll explain why I use that name. And overdeveloped, we have the addicted lover. Now, the first thing when it comes to the deficient lover is that you have excessive boundaries. Okay, you don't let people in. And I'm not talking about connecting in friendship and be like, hey, I like you, you're a cool person. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about allowing someone to see you for who you are, the true you, to see your vulnerabilities, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Really being vulnerable with someone and connecting deeply with them. I'm not just talking about on the surface, all right? So that would be the first thing. And the deficient lover would have a fear of this, a fear of that deep relationship, of the deep connection. They would not like that at all. Okay, so they would avoid it by putting up excessive boundaries. Now, again, the intensity of how this will show up in your life depends on how deficient you are. So if you are very deficient, you would prefer to avoid social interaction as much as you can. If you're mildly deficient, you would just not prefer it. Okay, you would prefer to be on your own and do your own thing. And if you have to go to some kind of social event or something, you would generally keep to yourself unless someone obviously approaches you. You wouldn't be the type of person who goes in there and talk to everybody, make new connections, make new friends. That wouldn't be you. In fact, if someone had to tell you, just make new friends, you would be like, why? Why do I want to do that? I'm just going to do me. No, thank you. Because the part of you that wants to connect with people and build that relationship with people around you isn't very active. So keep that in mind. It depends how deficient you are. Now, this leads me to the next point. A lot of people would say the deficient lover has a trait of fantasizing about things, like thinking of that person you really want to be with, but you don't have the guts to go talk to them. You just kind of think about them all day, but never do anything about it. Now, my take on it is a bit different. I believe the following. When it comes to this whole theory of someone who dreams about that person, they really want to be with them, but they don't do anything about it, think a little bit about this by using the knowledge of the archetypes that we've been through. What is the archetype of action? Warrior. So this is my take. Someone who's got a developed lover side would have a desire to be in a relationship, to connect, to share emotion and feel those feelings. But it takes someone with a developed warrior side to do something about it. You see, to actually get the courage and the guts to approach that person and do something about it. You see, so this is something to think about. These people also, by the way, tend to have very good connections, and they prefer connections with non-humans, animals, etc. Why? Because the animal will not betray you like people did probably. And that's why you have a deficient lover. Could be. Depends on the person. Just something to think about. Now, I want to take this time to explain something to you, but it is quite complicated, so I'm going to condense it and simplify it. Now, this applies to all of the archetypes, but I'm going to use the lover as an example, seeing that we're talking about it in this video. Now, the lover, which I said is the side of you that relates to desire, emotion, pleasure, connection, all of that kind of stuff. This side of ourselves needs to be honored and expressed in a healthy way. Otherwise, it shows up in unhealthy ways. Now, when we are deficient, what's kind of happening is you are suppressing that side of yourself. You're disconnecting from it. Now, that lover energy needs to be expressed, and you're not allowing it to be expressed. So what it would do is that energy will seep out in subconscious and negative ways. For example, one of the things the deficient lover does is the denial of pleasure. And this can take many forms. It can be like you really want to go on that vacation, but you deny that part of yourself. So you would say, I've got work to do. I can't do it. Or maybe you want that relationship with that person and you say to yourself, well, I'm not worthy. What am I going to offer them? So you're denying yourself pleasure. And this can take many forms. So if that's the case, that part of you that wants that pleasure will find a way to be expressed. So for example, let's take drinking alcohol. You might start drinking in the dark. Nobody knows about it. You're drinking subtly on the sidelines. That would be an expression of the lover energy that's seeping out. And it can take many forms. That's why I like the name reluctant lover, because you're reluctant to access this side of yourself. Now, what happens over time is the reluctant lover develops traits of the addicted lover, but it's in the dark, behind the scenes, below the surface, put it that way. So they start forming addictions. They start finding expressions of the lover archetype, things that give them pleasure, things that makes them feel connection, all that kind of stuff, but it happens in negative, you could say, twisted ways, okay, which is something you want to avoid. So in order to stop that, you're going to have to integrate the lover with your life. Bring the lover in instead of excluding it, because if you exclude it, it will just find ways to express itself anyway. Now think of the lover side of you as a free spirit, as the part of you that wants to experience fun, adventure, excitement, the carefree side of yourself. Now someone who's excessive in that regard, with some combinations of the other archetypes, will form someone who's, you could say, relatively oblivious to the reality of life. Everything is just like, just chill, man. What's the rush? Just have fun. Just, why are you so serious, So that would be their personality. Where someone who's a little bit more grounded can see the reality of things and be like, hey, can you just snap out of La La Land for a second and just see what's really going on? Where they are kind of drifting in the clouds. Everything is fun. Everything is just joyful, but they're kind of out of touch with reality. So someone who's deficient with the lover is out of touch with that side. So they kind of don't like change, unpredictability, and spontaneous things. So if you had to tell a deficient lover, let's pack up our things right now and let's go on a road trip, not planned, let's just go, they would not like that. The excessive lover, on the other hand, especially if they're very excessive, they tend to live their whole life like that. They live in the clouds. They need to come down to earth a little bit. They need to be grounded. Where the deficient lover needs to learn to get out of their rigid ways, get outside of that little shell that they've built for themselves. They're not living life. The lover side of us wants to live a life at the edge, if you want to put it that way. It wants to experience the excitement. So when there's something like doing something spontaneously, there's a side of you that's kind of like nervous about it. You're like, hey, we didn't plan this. But at the same time, it's kind of exciting. You don't know how it's going to go, and that excites you. If you think about it, a lot of the things we do that's not planned ends up being really fun. It was like, wow, that was actually quite cool. I didn't think it was going to go that way. So the lover side of us would like us to be in those situations a bit more. The excessive lover is too much in that way, and the deficient lover is way undercharged. They don't do it at all. So you need to get a mid-ground. Once again, balance. Too much of anything is not good. They also have a lack of desire, passion, and excitement in general. When someone comes and they throw you a surprise party and you're like, yay, thanks guys. So you're not very animated. Now this brings me to the point of desire, which is an impulse that we have that inspires us to move to something greater or embrace change. Now that desire comes from deep within you. And a lot of people don't know what their desires are. They don't know what they want. And in order to get in touch with our desires, we have to get in touch with our feelings. So it's quite interesting. People that develop the lover aspect, as soon as they start developing it and it starts growing, usually what happens is they have a shift in what they want to do with their lives because they get more clarity in terms of what their real desires are. So that's quite interesting. Now, desire can be seen as the roots for passion and enthusiasm. When we know what we desire, we're passionate at chasing it. Just like I said in part 1, when the child goes through that developmental phase of the lover, their desire stimulates the movement, right? So they see something and they desire to experience what it feels like. So they move towards it. So it inspires us to take action. So people that are deficient, they tend to go into this depressive state where they don't take action, they don't move anywhere because their sight is blurred. They don't know where to go. If we don't know where to send our warrior aspect, how can we achieve anything? So finding our desires, knowing what our deepest desires are, we have clarity on where we have to exercise the power of our warrior, the power of our ruler. Now we have direction. So it's very important to find that. Once you hit the bottom part, like the bottom half of the deficient side, so you're very deficient, you'll become emotionally numb. So you're kind of flat. There's no real ups and downs, So for example, you'll be in a situation where people are getting emotional maybe someone passed away and you don't really feel emotional, and you think to yourself, hey, I'm supposed to be emotional right now, but I'm not. And the same can be for happiness. Like I said, someone surprises you with something you really wanted, and they're like, hey, I got you this gift maybe, and your response is like, hey, thank you. Like you're like that, but you're not like, whoa, I've been waiting for this moment forever. You're not very emotional. So that could be one of the signs that you're very deficient, which will happen at the more extreme end. The next thing is the deficient lover tends to be intolerant of themselves and other people. They tend to be very judgmental because they can't see from the other person's emotional and feeling perspective. So remember now, emotions and stuff drive us in a sense. Okay, so for example, desire, passion, that drives you to achieve things and to get things done, and it acts like fuel pretty much. The deficient lover doesn't have that very strongly. So they kind of judge people in a way where I don't get why you would do that, because they don't understand that emotions, desire, passion, feelings kind of motivate you to do certain things. They don't come from that perspective because they don't have that within them. They don't experience those states of emotions and feelings. Now, when it comes to self-intolerance, this is something that can actually show up in both the deficient and the excessive in some cases. They both have to learn to accept themselves, to love themselves, and to show compassion to themselves. They need to be softer with themselves in general. They need to work in that area and develop that. And by self-love, I don't mean be selfish. I mean love yourself and take care of yourself and treat yourself with love and kindness and compassion. That's what I mean. Also, the deficient lover lacks empathy. They don't see things from your emotional perspective. So they just make decisions what they want to do. I don't care how you feel. They don't really think of how you feel to begin with, because the part of them that's designed to connect with other people, to see things from their perspective emotionally, is not developed. So they don't really have that ability. So they just do something and like, hey, look what I've done, and that would hurt you because maybe, that was an insensitive thing to do. Yes, the deficient lover is insensitive, and not really by choice. It's just that's the way they are now at this stage, because the part of them that makes them sensitive is underdeveloped. So they're going to have to develop that part to become sensitive again, to be able to feel what you feel and be like, hey, I shouldn't say these words now because it's going to hurt you, because they can understand how you would feel. Where the deficient lover, they can't really understand, they just say it. And they're like, hey, it was the truth, man. I was just being honest. They don't see things from an emotional perspective, which also leads them to be selfish. They tend to be selfish individuals. Once again, because they don't see the emotional implications of what they do. They have, like I said in the other video, they tend to have excessive boundaries. So everything is about them. I spoke about it when I spoke about the bubble that people put themselves in the earlier episodes. And I said that bubble makes them selfish. This is a problem that the deficient lover will run into. They will do things where they think it's a good idea, but then people would be angry at them. Like, why did you do that? And you think, what, it was a good idea? Yes, for you, because you're cut off from other people. You're not connected with them. So when you look at a problem or something that you want, you don't see it from the perspective of, the emotional perspective from other people. You just see it from your own one. And you think, I'm okay with it, so I'm just going to do it. But you're forgetting that there's other people that's going to suffer because of your decision. You don't see that because you're not emotionally invested in other people. The last thing I want to touch on with this individual is that they generally have difficulty putting their feelings into words. They would often tell you, if you ask them how you're feeling, they would say, I don't know how I'm feeling, because they're out of touch with their emotions. They struggle connecting with their emotions and feelings. So where the balanced lover can easily pinpoint and say, you know what, I feel kind of angry, I feel frustrated, I feel anxious. They can put their feelings into words quite easily. Where the underdeveloped lover would struggle to do that. They don't know what they're feeling. They just feel meh, like just flat. And if they do feel feelings, this is if you're not so deficient. If you're a little bit deficient, your emotions won't be so strong. You see, you would feel the emotions, like I feel happy, I feel angry, I feel sad, I feel excited, but it's not so strong. And you generally see this in people when they go through life and they go through a lot, a lot of traumatic experiences. Their emotions tend to lose their intensity because they're numbing themselves over time so that they don't feel the emotion so intensely, mainly because there's a lot of pain, a lot of disappointment, a lot of betrayal that happened. So they numb the emotions. And I said in part one why this happens, but that's what would happen. So your emotions would decrease in intensity. So if you think back, you would say, hey, there was a time in my life when I really got excited. Like I was super excited. Now I'm just like, whatever, man. If it happens, it happens. You're kind of numb to emotion. That would be a deficient trait. Now, the deficient lover tends to have a general dislike in people who do show strong emotions. When people get emotional around them, it makes them feel very uncomfortable. The excessive lover, on the other side, will get emotional as well, and their feelings will fly away with them. They'll get super emotional. They're not grounded enough. Now, I said this in previous episodes. If you're balanced, you can access both sides of the spectrum if you choose. So, for example, let's say you're in a relationship and you have to break up with them for whatever reason. And you have to kind of detach from your emotions here to do the right thing. You'll be able to do it. So you can access that side of the spectrum. Where if someone is excessive in the lover, to tell them, hey, just harden up and break up with them and get it over with. They wouldn't be able to do that because they're leaning too far into the one side. For them to go and detach, which is the deficient side, it's too far for them. They can't go there. They're too much into the excessive side. That's what would happen. So the balanced lover can choose, and that's very important. If you're deficient in the lover side, then you will also have the following. If you had to make a list of the emotions that you feel, like the spectrum of emotions, the primary emotion that you would experience would be irritability or anger. That's one of the signs that you're deficient. Where obviously the balanced lover has got the full, colorful range of emotions and you experience life way more vividly. Now let's take a look at the excessive lover, which means this part of yourself is overly developed, it's overactive. Now once again, this happens for many reasons. I'm going to give you one example, the easiest one, and that is that your parents might have been overdeveloped lovers and they kind of raised you to be the same, so you got conditioned to be overdeveloped in the lover side of yourself. So you're going to have to balance that out, right? Now in part one, I said the lover archetype is also the side of us that wants to be social, our social side. So the excessive lover, now it depends how excessive you are, tends to be overly expressive. They talk too much. Now, once again, the other archetypes play a role here. So if you've got someone who's excessive in the warrior and excessive in the lover, there'll be someone who's very loud and dominating in conversations and social interactions. They'll maybe talk over people, you see, just interrupt conversations. They're very loud. So that might be that individual. It depends how the other archetypes are formed. Like I said, there are many levels to this. Your boundaries is like your shield against many things, okay, including emotions and negative experiences. You can kind of shield yourself against that, where the excessive lover tends to not really have that. Besides that, they also don't have very good social boundaries, you know, so they'll get into your personal space. They'll cross the line in many ways, if you want to put it that way, where the deficient lover prefers not to get close to you to start off with because they don't want to be close to you because they don't want connection, you see? So that's the big difference here. When it comes to partnership and relationships, the excessive lover tends to be very clingy, they tend to easily get jealous, and they overly attach. And it's quite common for them to get into codependent relationships. So they over-attach to their partners. They get very, very clingy and possessive with them. That's what happens with the excessive lover. The excessive lover tends to be emotionally dependent. So if they're in a relationship, they would expect their partner to make them happy. They seek for fulfillment outside of themselves, and they can be described as being eternally restless, jumping from experience to experience. They can jump from relationship to relationship. They seek to fill up that void they have inside of themselves by collecting experiences, collecting things, going through relationships. That's what they kind of do. But once again, it depends how excessive you are, and that will determine how intense this trait will be in your life. The deficient lover would feel that a normal, balanced lover is high maintenance, because the deficient lover doesn't really connect with emotion. So whenever you're in a relationship and your partner is like, hey, I want to connect a little bit. I want to share some emotions and, just bond a little bit. The deficient lover would be like, yo, you're so high maintenance. Because for them, bonding is like last on the list, So for them, just to do normal, balanced bonding and emotional sharing and connection would be a lot of effort. You see, so keep that in mind. But the excessive lover would genuinely be high maintenance. They're very needy and they're difficult in this sense. They're quite difficult to please, and they're very emotionally attached and codependent, obviously. Now, as I've mentioned before, they're overly sensitive and they've got very strong emotions. So when they get angry, they get super angry. And when they get happy, they get super happy. And it is usually not appropriate, put it that way. Like the balanced lover has got strong emotions as well, but it's generally appropriate amounts of emotional expression. Where the excessive lover, they'll just like cry and break down about something really simple. They are overly emotional. Now, it's important to compare this with the balanced lover who's got stability and clarity in emotional states, where the excessive lover tends to get emotional and then they would do things in their emotional state and later have a lot of regret about what they've done. Something that can also show up in the excessive lover is seductive manipulation. And the easiest way to think of this is think of the woman that seduces the man to get what she wants, as I've mentioned earlier. So this can also be prominent in the excessive lover, where the deficient lover would probably never do that because they don't want to connect with you and show vulnerability anyway, which means intimacy. Like I said with the warrior, the excessive warrior tends to have a deficient lover because they're kind of opposites. So if you look at the deficient lover, they don't want you in their space. They don't even really want to hug you. Where the excessive lover doesn't have a problem, They can hook up with someone just to get their own needs met. They can do that. They don't have a problem with that. Last on the list is pleasure addiction. And this can take many forms. It can take the form of drinking alcohol, partying, sexual pleasure. It can take the form of many things. Now, this is quite common where you see people jump from relationship to relationship to relationship. There's a saying that says the excessive lover wants to taste all flavors of life. They're never satisfied. When they find something, they want to jump to the next thing. They're quickly bored and they want to taste the new flavor of life, put it that way. So it's quite common that the excessive lover would cheat, would jump from relationship to relationship. Now, earlier I spoke about how we need to make sure that we express the energy of the archetypes in a balanced and healthy way. Otherwise, they will find a way to be expressed, and usually it's in a negative and you can even say perverted way, which is far from ideal. So I'm going to give you 2 examples here with the excessive lover. Let's first talk about if you're in a relationship and you can't express your lover energy in that relationship for whatever reason, okay? There's no outlet for your lover energy. Then what the excessive lover would do is they will find another avenue to express that. And that can be partying, drinking, it can be even as far as having a one-night stand with someone. It depends on the person, right? So they're finding avenues to express it. Now, another example could be that you have the opportunity to express that lover energy, but you're so excessive in the lover that you're never satisfied. There's too much energy and it needs to go somewhere, and the relationship is not taking enough of it. Now what could happen is the same. You'll find another avenue to channel the excess energy in. So obviously if you balance yourself, that lover archetype won't be so strong. So the energy will be more distributed throughout all the archetypes and not just channeled into one. Then you become imbalanced, right? Now I want to bring the deficient lover back in here for a second. Now I said earlier that the deficient lover must learn to balance themselves out and honor and express the lover side of themselves. Because if they don't do that, that energy must get expressed somehow. So what tends to happen is they turn into the addictive lover in secret. and they tend to develop a lot of the excessive traits there. So they too can have affairs, can cheat on people, and engage in sexual activity in secret. They can do this, but their motivation will be a little bit different. I said that the deficient lover lacks color. They lack aliveness. Their lives are generally quite boring. So what they would do is they would do this to get a kick out of it, to get a rush, to feel more alive, to charge themselves, if you want to put it that way. So it's a little bit different. Now, it's important to understand that I'm not saying that these are the reasons why people engage in these type of activities. There are many reasons, and it's usually as a result of deeply rooted issues that needs to be dealt with and healed. All I'm doing here is I'm giving you a couple of examples of how that kind of behavior relates to the concept of archetypes. What's also important, and you see this with people that's got an excessive lover side, if they go through a breakup, they can rebound with someone else and have a one-night stand with them because they're throwing more energy into their lover department. They're seeking pleasure to cope with their pain. You see what they're doing? So they're throwing it into the lover, where with the other archetypes, they would do it differently. You see, the magician might throw their pain into studying, into gaining knowledge, into figuring out problems and stuff like that. Where, like we said in the last video, the warrior would push it into achieving things, work, etc. So the lover tends to do that. They push it into the lover's side, seeking pleasure, going out, partying, that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting to see things in that perspective. So I hope that part 1 and part 2 gives you a more all-rounded understanding of the lover archetype and its importance in life, especially in connections and enjoying life to the fullest.